April 14th, 1935. It was a warm Sunday afternoon on the Great Plains. Children were playing outside, families were having dinner. Then someone looked north. A wall of black, 2 miles high, was moving toward them at 60 miles per hour. Not rain, not clouds, dirt. The sky turned black at noon. 7,000 Americans died of what doctors called dust pneumonia, their lungs slowly filling with the finest soil on earth. 2.5 million people abandoned everything and fled west, but some families stayed. For nearly a decade, through black blizzards, crop failure, and starvation, they held on. The ones who survived were not the richest, they were not the strongest. They were the ones who still carried knowledge that most Americans today have completely forgotten. Knowledge so practical, so specific, so hard-earned, that it cannot be learned from a phone or a store. It can only be learned from the people who lived it. This is what they knew. This is how they survived. And this is why it matters right now more than most people realize. Welcome to Old American Ways. To understand what the Dust Bowl survivors knew, you first have to understand what everyone else got wrong. The Great Plains had been covered for thousands of years by native grasses, buffalo grass, blue grama, roots that went 6 feet deep into the soil. Those roots held everything together through droughts, through winds, through every extreme condition the prairie could throw at them. Then came World War I. Wheat prices soared. The government told farmers, plow everything you can. The country needs wheat. The world needs wheat. New gasoline tractors, the most powerful farming machines the world had ever seen, ripped up 5 million acres of native grassland. Those 6-foot roots, gone. The topsoil, exposed, and for a while, it worked. The 1920s were good years. Rain came, wheat grew, farmers bought more land, plowed more acres. Then in 1931, the rains stopped, not for a season, for years. And here is what nobody who was doing the plowing understood. The land they had farmed so successfully in the 1920s was running on borrowed time. They had removed the roots that held the soil. They had stripped away the protection that nature had spent thousands of years building. The moment the drought hit, there was nothing left to hold the earth in place. By 1933, there were 38 major dust storms on the Great Plains. Topsoil that had taken 1,000 years per inch to build was blowing away in minutes. And the worst was still coming. Here is something worth sitting with. The farmers who caused the Dust Bowl were not careless people. They were not greedy people. They were hard-working Americans doing exactly what the government and the market asked them to do. They plowed because wheat prices were high. They expanded because land was cheap. They followed every modern technique the agricultural experts recommended, and they still destroyed one of the most fertile regions on the planet. This is what happens when a generation of people stops listening to the land and starts listening only to the price of wheat. The Great Plains had rules written into the soil itself over thousands of years. Break the rules, even with the best intentions, and the land collects the debt. Always. The Dust Bowl was not bad luck. It was the bill coming due for decisions made in the good years. The families who survived understood this. The families who didn't thought the good years would last forever. April 14th, 1935. Black Sunday. That morning had been warm and clear, the clearest day in weeks. Families came outside for the first time in a long time. Children played in the streets, women hung laundry. Farmers walked their fields, feeling something close to hope. At 4 in the afternoon, a wall of black appeared on the northern horizon. Imogene Glover was a child in the Oklahoma Panhandle that Sunday. She later described it. There was no sound, no wind, nothing, just an immense dark cloud moving toward us. And then it hit. The static electricity inside that wall of dust was so powerful it shorted out car engines, knocked people off their feet with electric shocks, made barbed wire fences glow blue in the dark. People caught outside lay face down on the ground and held their shirts over their mouths and noses. Families who made it inside stuffed every crack, every window frame, every gap under the door, with wet rags and towels. Then they sat in the dark and waited and breathed through wet cloth. When the storm finally passed, Kansas farmer Lawrence Svoboda walked outside and looked at his land. He wrote in his journal, "Not a green thing, not a blade of grass, not a single living plant, just brown, dead, empty dirt as far as I could see." That night, a journalist named Robert Geiger filed his dispatch and used 2 words that would define an entire decade of American suffering. The Dust Bowl. The name stuck because it was the most accurate description anyone had found for what was happening to the American heartland. In the years after Black Sunday, 2.5 million Americans made a decision no one wants to make. They left. They packed everything they owned into old cars so overloaded that tires blew out every few miles on the road. A Texas farmer told photographer Dorothea Lange about the moment he decided, 1927. "I made $7,000, 1932. I hit the road." 5 years from prosperity to nothing. They drove west on Route 66. They were called Okies, a word used like an insult by the Californians who didn't want them. Signs in California diners read, "Okies and dogs not allowed inside." They arrived to find 35 cents an hour for backbreaking field work, tent camps in drainage ditches, children sick from water that no one had thought to keep clean. The most famous photograph of this entire era was taken by Dorothea Lange in a California pea pickers camp in 1936. A woman, gaunt-faced, holding 3 children who turned their faces away from the camera. Her name was Florence Owens Thompson. She was 32 years old. She looked 50. Florence Thompson later said she resented that photograph, that it followed her the rest of her life, that she never received a single cent from its endless circulation. But that photograph, known as Migrant Mother, is the face of the Dust Bowl, the face of 2.5 million Americans who left everything and found almost nothing on the other side. Here is what nobody says about the families who left. Leaving was not weakness. Leaving was a rational decision made by people who had already lost everything. The question history asks, and rarely answers honestly, is why some families stayed. Not why they were stubborn, not why they were in denial, but why, knowing everything they knew, they looked at that devastated land and said, "This is ours. We are not leaving." The answer is not sentiment. The answer is knowledge. The families who stayed had something the families who left didn't have. They knew how to survive on almost nothing. They knew how to dust-proof a house with flour paste and newspaper, feed a family of 5 on dried beans and root vegetables, keep animals alive through conditions that should have killed them. They stayed not because they were brave, though they were, but because they had a specific set of skills that made staying possible. And those skills came from one source only: the generation before them, their parents, their grandparents, the people who had homesteaded the Great Plains with nothing but what they knew. Knowledge passed down person to person, year to year. The families who survived the Dust Bowl were the last generation of Americans who carried that knowledge as standard equipment. We are 2 generations past the last of them. Think about what that means. Let me tell you exactly what the survivors knew, because this is the part that most Dust Bowl history never talks about. The first thing they knew was how to seal a house against disaster. Dust Bowl farm wives discovered that mixing flour paste with newspaper and plastering it against the interior walls reduced the dust penetration by 70%. Not a hardware store solution, not an engineered product. flour, newspaper, paste. They hung wet sheets in doorways. They draped wet burlap over furniture. They stored water in sealed metal containers before the storm hit, not after. Because by the time you're looking for water after the storm hits, it's already too late. The second thing they knew was how to keep animals alive. A farm without working horses had no future, no power for ploughing, no way to replant when the rains finally came back. Dust Bowl farmers dug dugouts, temporary shelters cut into hillsides, where horses could breathe slightly filtered air during the worst storms. They soaked feed in water before giving it to animals to keep the dust out of it. They tied wet cloths around the muzzles of horses during the worst storms so the animals could breathe without filling their lungs with the same dust that was killing people. The third thing they knew was survival cooking. A Dust Bowl kitchen operated on what we would today call nothing: dried beans, cornmeal, root vegetables hauled out of a cellar that was dug below the frost line to keep things cold without electricity. A technique they called putting by, storing food in the good years so it was waiting in the bad ones. Every calorie was tracked, every jar was dated, everything moved front to back. Oldest used first, newest stored last. This is not folk wisdom. The US Army calls this food supply rotation protocol. It is in every field manual for every forward operating base in every combat zone today. Your grandmother invented it in her root cellar in 1932. She called it keeping house properly. And the fourth thing, the most important thing, was each other. Here is the survival fact that no product can replace and no government can provide. The families who survived the entire decade of the Dust Bowl almost universally described the same thing when you asked them how. Their neighbors. When a family ran out of food, neighbors brought what they had. When a well went dry, the community shared from theirs. When a child got sick, the whole county helped pay the doctor. This was not organized charity, it was not church programming. It was not a government program, it was survival mathematics. If your neighbor dies, you have one fewer person to help you when your time comes. Taking care of each other was not generosity, it was strategy. And here is the part that never makes it into the history books. The families who survived the Dust Bowl together built something that outlasted the disaster. Communities, mutual trust, the knowledge that the people around you would not let you fall. When the rains finally came back in 1939, after nearly a decade, the families who had stayed together rebuilt together, and they rebuilt fast. Because they still had everything that matters: the land, the knowledge, and each other. Here is what I want you to think about after this video ends. The Dust Bowl did not happen because Americans were weak. It happened because a generation of hard-working, decent people made decisions in the good years that they couldn't undo in the bad ones. They plowed land that should not have been plowed. They stripped roots that were holding everything together. They bet everything on conditions that could not last. And when the bill came due, the families who survived were the ones who had never stopped living by the old knowledge, who still knew how to seal a house against disaster, how to feed a family on almost nothing, how to keep animals alive in impossible conditions, how to take care of each other when the system fails. We are 3 generations past those families now. We inherited their land, we inherited their country, but we did not inherit their knowledge. We traded it for the convenience of the grocery store and the certainty of the power grid, which work beautifully, right up until the moment they don't. Your great-grandmother knew how to survive when everything stopped working. The question worth asking, after watching this, is whether we do. Tell me in the comments, did your grandparents keep a root cellar? Did your family have a cistern? Was there still an old hand pump standing in the yard somewhere in your family's past? Because this was never just about the Dust Bowl, it was about the quiet confidence of people who knew they could take care of themselves when everything else failed. They knew. Now you know too. This has been old American ways, where the past is never truly gone.